name is Paul, and I am a nerd, and this is the May 2014 Tabs3 Virtual User Group meeting. If you've attended any of our virtual user group meetings in the past couple months, you may be proud to see that it actually says that this is the Tabs3 Virtual User Group meeting. I'm really kind of being on my toes because I'm a little bit nervous. I'm on my own today. Mary Jo, we let her go away, and that means I am going to present both topics. But that means that A, I have to present both topics, but it also means B, when I'm preparing for it, I can't ask my favorite tech support person, Mary Jo, how to get this shown most effectively or how to best illustrate this point. So hopefully this will go all right. We'll just have to wait and see. Please be kind. Now, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Today, just in case you're wondering what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about how to get data into the from your cost recovery devices, from your phone system, from your copying machine, from your postage meter, all the different things that are doing things that you might want to bill a client for. There are ways to get that data into Tabs. We're going to look at all the different ways and all the different options. And we're also going to look at how AP/GL integration works. We've talked a lot about integration, and we've talked a lot about AP integrating with Tabs, and GL is kind of lost along the way. We're very excited that when you write a check for the $100 to pay a court cost, that it can go into Tabs so you don't forget to bill the client for that advance. But the more important aspect is what's happening in the middle in between those two transactions integrating is its integration with GL and making sure that your checks that you write go to the right place so that you don't ever have to really worry about GL or making entries because they just happen when you write the checks. That's a very nice thing to have, not to have to worry about GL and to just write checks and have them go to the right place. So we're going to talk about that. But just a little bit more housekeeping before we get started. This that I am showing on my screen right now is the Gotowebinar control panel. If you are seeing this, it's because you have not clicked this button that looks like an arrow that points to the right, because when you do click that button, this goes away. This part stays out there, and this button that, when you clicked it, looked like an arrow pointing to the right, will change, and it will now be an arrow pointing to the left, because if you click it again, this thing will come back. Now, why would you want it to come back? Because you're shy and you have a question, and you can type your questions here and press send. And Leanne, our humble yet, gosh, all this pressure to be doing this on my own, and I forgot to come up with an adjective to describe Leanne other than humble. So today Leanne will simply be our humble moderator. She will recognize that you have a question. She will interrupt me at the appropriate time, and she will ask your question on your behalf. Now, while she's asking it or while I'm answering it, if you come up with auxiliary questions, or maybe I'm not going in the right direction and I'm answering the wrong question, type more here, and remember at all times to hit send, or else Leanne won't get your message, and she'll keep asking questions on your behalf. Now, if you're not feeling shy, and we haven't had this in a while, so maybe there will be some not shy people out there today, you can also press this button, which looks like a hand with an arrow pointing upwards in front of it. That means raise your hand. Same thing will happen. Leanne will still interrupt me at the opportune time, but instead of reading your question for you, she will simply unmute you so you can ask your own question. Again, that line of communication, that your microphone, if you will remain on until I am done answering your question. So if I'm not headed in the right direction, or if you come up with other questions, feel free to just interrupt me or to ask those questions, and we will make sure we get the questions answered that way. So without any further ado, this is where I'd usually turn things over to Mary Jo. This is where you want to pay close attention to whether or not I mess this up, because normally it would be a handoff, and it's not going to be a handoff. I just don't know what to do here. Let's talk about getting data. Now, there are a lot of ways to get data. For instance, you can pull journal entries into the General Ledger if you have a payroll service, or if you're using Pensoft's payroll. That's one way to import data into the General Ledger. You can actually import journal entries. The Accounts Payable system would let you import invoices. Now, normally you write a check and you put an invoice in one at a time. We have some firms, like a patent firm, for instance, might get a bill from a foreign fee annuity company that has literally thousands of line items on it, and the firm wants to create a separate invoice for each and bill the client separately. That's an example of when you'd want to pull invoices en masse into accounts payable. There's ways to pull fees into the billing system, but those things aren't what we're talking about today. Today we are specifically talking about cost recovery systems. Now these are going to be things that keep track of all sorts of things. Photocopies that you make, you can tell how old I am because I call them photocopies. Phone calls and the recovering the long distance charges. Again, you can tell how old I am because there aren't a lot of firms these days that are billing clients or pushing those expenses through, but there still are a few. Postage meters, faxes, some people count how many print jobs they have. All of these are things that may be happening, that you may have pieces of software in your network or on your postage meter or on your copier that are capturing these events as things that could be billed back to a matter. So what we're going to talk about is how to get them into the software, how to pull those costs in so that they come in automatically without having to be rekeyed. And that's what some people are doing. They just have a piece of paper or a form next to the postage meter, and people write down the client number and they write down how much postage they used, and that's fine, but of course there's no automatic way to get those in. You just type them in. So I've got a couple knowledge base articles up on my screen because that's mainly how we're going to talk about this, because there's really not much to show you. In the old days, there were a lot of different programs that SCI had, and that's why I have this KB article up right here. You'll notice that it was last reviewed in 2012, and that's really about when it became obsolete. So I want to show you this so that you know that if you stumble upon this bit of information, it's really not where you ultimately want to head. And the reason I want to show it to you is because they used to have all sorts of programs, however you would pronounce that, copy, GDCM. You'll notice some of them are called TBDevice, and we'll get into that in a second. XPR, TCONV, a whole bunch of different programs that they had that you could get from software technology or from people at Tabs3 that would hook specifically to your device interface. They've gotten away from that. You'll notice that a lot of these entries say TBDevice, and that is how you get data into STI now. Now, if you go to the STI software website, and I think I can get to this, let's find out. Maybe I should just tell you, but I'm going to try and show you how to get there yourself in case you have questions later. If you go to pricing, I think if we scroll down, yeah, you see they've changed this, and so we don't really have this on here anymore. I will simply tell you the TBDevice program is $205 for the first year, and that includes the first year's maintenance. And if you elect to renew your maintenance, I believe it's $58 per year after that. That program, TBDevice, is the only program that STI has now to get data in from all these different devices, from the copying machines, from the copy interfaces that you might hook into your copying machine, like CopyTrack, from the postage meter interfaces, from the programs that collect how many print jobs were done, how many color print jobs versus how many black and white print jobs. All of these programs now will interface with TBDevice. Now the way it works, and so I'm going to switch over to this next article. This article number R11506, I didn't tell you the article number here because it really contains obsolete information. I just wanted to point out that we no longer have a whole bunch of different programs. Article number R11506 is kind of like your catch-all for all the different information about getting stuff into Tabs and PracticeMaster. Now, what you want to notice is that up here we have the cost recovery software and the cost recovery product information, and we have some information about Equitrack because it's so popular. We might have CopyTrack. I don't see it though. This is how to get that stuff into Tabs, but you'll also notice this talks about getting data into PracticeMaster and General Ledger, like I was talking about, pulling in those payroll entries, and trust accounting and accounts payable. We can pull stuff into all those things. We're just not talking about them right now. And then finally here, oh, that's the same article. So if we go here, oh, that's the same article too. So we're just going to talk about Tabs TBDevice. and give you an overview of how it works. All of these devices, all of these things that hook into your copying machine, into your postage meter, wherever, will put out something called an ASCII file. Sometimes it's called a CSV file. Sometimes it's called a text file. Rather than writing all these and supporting all these extraneous programs that hook into this device and this device and this device, because they all have different ways of putting it out, the people at STI finally said, well, let's just put out one program called TBDevice. It'll be configurable. You'll be able to define this is how the data looks when it comes in from the copying machine. This is how the data looks when it comes in from the fax machine. This is how the data looks when it comes in from the phone system. And you can then use TBDevice to import those costs directly into the advance or expense section of Tabs using whichever format you have set up. And they have a bunch of predefined formats. Just like they used to have a whole bunch of different programs, they now have one program with a bunch of different predefined formats, and you also then have the ability to define your own formats. That's why I say there really isn't anything that we don't integrate with now, simply because as long as whatever you have to capture these costs can put out an ASCII file or a CSV file or a text file, they're all the same thing. Us nerds just like to have a lot of different ways to describe the same thing. As long as they can put that file out, you can use TBDevice to pull it in. Now, one more thing to mention is that many of you have, all of you have, I guess, if you have Tabs, something called PracticeMaster. You have at least one free license that came with Tabs in an effort to convince you that you should buy PracticeMaster licenses for everyone. And you can use that too, because PracticeMaster has something called the Data Import Wizard, or the Import Data Wizard if you are not dyslexics. Let me get rid of that. And the Import Data Wizard allows me to pick a file that I want to import into. One of them is cost. Pick something that I'm going to import, and I don't have anything, but I'll just explain, and then say this field goes here, this field goes here, this field goes here. So if you had a spreadsheet, if you will, that had a date, a client number, a number of copies, and a transaction code to use to identify whether it's black and white copies or color copies, you could then map that file so that the first field was mapped to the transaction date, the second field was mapped to the client ID, the third field was mapped to what we call units when we're entering a cost, and the fourth field is mapped to transaction code. And once you've mapped that, you can save that mapping so that you don't have to remap it every time. You can just pull this mapping up. And once you get past that point, you can then tell it to import the data, and it will. And it's kind of like what TBDevice does, only you're kind of doing it through PracticeMaster. Now, TBDevice is nice because it knows all the formats of all the existing pieces of software, all the existing device interfaces like the EquiTrack and the CopyTrack and the postage interfaces and whatever. But PracticeMaster can do this too. Again, we're not covering this, but I will point out that you can also import fees this way. And in fact, you can import anything into Tabs as long as it's something that PracticeMaster also shows. PracticeMaster, of course, is hooked into Tabs, so when we import costs into PracticeMaster, they are instantly also in Tabs. When we import fees into PracticeMaster, they are instantly also in Tabs. Now, things that you can't import using the Data Import Wizard would be things like General Ledger, journal records, statements, payments, write-offs, that sort of thing. Client information that's not stored in PracticeMaster, like billing frequency or sales tax, whether or not we charge sales tax to that particular matter. So there are a lot of things that you can pull into Tabs through PracticeMaster, fees and costs among them, and of course today we're talking about costs, but there are a lot of things you can't because the information is not accessible in PracticeMaster, and therefore it's not something that can be pulled in through PracticeMaster. So hopefully that's somewhat clear. Leanne is going to tell me whether or not people have questions.
No questions.
No questions. So it's clear, or else nobody really came to hear this. They came to hear the next topic. And the next topic is, how does AP integrate with GL? going to get out of this and get out of PracticeMaster. I'm going to go back to AP. And I'm going to go back to the main menu. This is AP. And very quickly I'm going to write a check for $100 to the clerk of courts, just so that if you haven't attended a meeting where I've done this hundreds of times before, you'll be able to picture how this works. We're going to write a check to the clerk of courts with today's date, which my system, my demo system thinks 11/17 is today's date. We'll go with that. For $100, let's pretend it is a filing fee for the white divorce. And then usually what happens is you click here, you save, and it goes over to Tabs, and you bill it to Kelly White. Okay, and that's usually what I'm showing, because people are usually very interested in how we bill for that stuff that we are doing in accounts payable, those checks that we're writing to the clerk of courts or to an expert witness or whoever. And so usually this is where I focus my attention when I talk about integrating AP with Tabs. But what happens, and I'm going to go ahead and I've saved this, and I have now effectively written the check. I haven't printed it, but I've written the check. I've put it into GL. I always mention that, but I always kind of gloss over it. And I have billed for it. And of course, that's what everybody is most excited about, the fact that we are billing for this fee at the same time that we're writing the check. So the non-sexy part is this right here. I'm going to go do this again. I'm going to do another check to the clerk of courts, same scenario, $100, but I'm not going to gloss over this, because this is the important part when it comes to integrating AP with GL. Now, when you write a check, it knows, because you told it, which bank account you're using, and in a minute we'll see how that bank account hooks in with the GL bank account. When we write a check, it knows that part of it is the money coming out, part of the general ledger entry is the money coming out, but part of the other part of the general ledger entry is what that money is going to be expensed against. So this is the part where we do that. This is the part where we say the money came out of the bank account, but it's going against cost advances, or it's going against rent if you're rent expense if you're writing a rent check, or it's going against office supplies if you're writing a check to Office Max. Leanne, there's a question.
There is a question. I'm going to unmute Perpetua.
We're unmuting somebody. This is exciting. Perpetua, are you there? Can you hear me, Perpetua?
Yes.
What's your question?
Can you confirm that you can import from like Quicken or Quickbooks?
Well, I'll give my opinion on that. SGI claims, and they do, they integrate with General Ledger. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about integrating our accounts payable with our General Ledger with our tabs. But let me very quickly back out here and go in here, and I'm going to go over here to support, and I'm going to very quickly explain how the QuickBooks integration works, or how it's supposed to work. The problem, and while we're getting there, I'm going to give you my opinion. Oops. Supports Tabs3. I can't talk and type at the same time. Okay, and we're going to type QuickBooks. And we're going to go to Overview of QuickBooks Integration. This is where they talk about it. Now this right here is how we integrate. And the QuickBooks integration is kind of backwards in my mind. You start in Tabs, and when you enter the advance against the client's bill to bill for it, it can then automatically push that over to QuickBooks to create the check. So it's not, Perpetua, it's not a matter of us importing from QuickBooks. It's a matter of us pushing the information out to QuickBooks from Tabs. You'll notice that if we're going to pull stuff in from QuickBooks, there's a merge procedure, but it doesn't cover everything that we'd want to integrate. When we're starting in Tabs and putting in the check into Tabs, it can automatically push that out to QuickBooks. Now, I'm not a big fan of QuickBooks integration. In fact, a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, do you integrate with QuickBooks? And I'll say, yes, but you don't want to do it. If you're not going to use our integrated accounts payable and general ledger from Software Technology, and you do have QuickBooks, I say that's fine, but I say you will experience much more pain trying to get it to integrate than you would trying to simply put into place procedures that allow you to automatically, and instantly make that double manual entry. I think it's easier to make the double manual entry, to put it in Tabs and put it in QuickBooks when appropriate, than it is to jump through all the hoops you have to get this to work. So the short answer to your question is yes, here's where you would go to find out more about that. And this is KB article number R10866. The long answer is I don't recommend it, and since it's a little bit off topic from what we're looking at here, I'm going to answer it that much and then tell you that I'll email you Perpetua, and I'm going to ask Leanne to make a note to remind me to do that. I will email you or call you, and we'll set up a time when we can talk a little bit more about how that may or may not work. Now, back then to this example, this is where you write the check and where you tell it which bank account, because that's half the transaction right there that needs to integrate with GL. Part of the journal entry is that we need to pull the money out of this bank account because that's where the check's coming from. The other half of the journal entry is where you want it to go. And you'll notice that in this instance, we're going to pull the money out of the bank account, and we're going to place it in an account that keeps track of it under client cost advanced. And as I said before, if we were writing a check for the rent, we would pull that money out of the bank account, and we would put it against the rent expense account. And that's where this comes in. This is that other half of the transaction. You'll notice that we have the ability to have multiple entries here. So when we click the Add button, there's nothing left to distribute for this check, but we could have said that half of it was going to go against client cost advances, but for whatever reason, the other half was going to go against something else. For sake of discussion, I'm going to put it against employee advances, even though that wouldn't be what you would do. And for some reason, I got this back down to 0. But this is where you tell it what that's going against. So during the transaction, the two things that have to do with integrating are what bank account and what should we put it against. Now, once you've written a check to clerk of courts and put it against client cost advances, and I'm not going to save this because I don't want to mess up my system, because every time after that, it will default to whatever you had that first time until you change it. So when you write that first check to clerk of courts for Lancaster County, and you say this goes against client cost advances, and in a clerk of courts type situation, that's always going to be the case, then you really never have to change this again. Every time you write a check after that, you'll pull it out of that bank account, and it will always know to put it against client cost advances. You really don't have to think about it at that point. In fact, a lot of times people will simply hit Save Here. It will warn you if you haven't looked at the screen that you didn't do anything on that screen, and you say, okay, I know what I'm doing, and it takes you through to Tabs. Now, the other side of the coin is how do we set this up? And that's done in customization. So if we go into customization, there are two tabs within customization. You'll go first to the main tab where you define your accounts payable aging periods and whether or not you're going to print the miscellaneous vendor address on the pre-check register and what your default bank account is. Then, under General Ledger, you can tell it we want to integrate with GL, that we do want to force the GL amounts and invoice amount to balance, and you can give it a journal description as to how the journal entry is going to be created. In this instance, we said when we create these journal entries over in the General Ledger side, we want to put the vendor name followed by the invoice description as a default. And then you also tell it how you're going to integrate with Tabs, whether you're going to do it, and if so, do you want anything in the description that would appear on the client's bill to automatically come over from AP? In my sample system, I have it put the vendor number in the name, but most of our clients don't. Most of them set it to none because the client doesn't know what vendor you paid it to, that it was the clerk of the Lancaster court. They just want to see it as filing fee or whatever language you use to describe it on the bill. So still we have this thing about where do we hook the bank account in AP into the General Ledger bank account. Because you notice over here, when we're writing these checks, it wants to know what, oh, that's vendor. When we're writing a check, it wants to know what bank account we're pulling it from. Well, we define those bank accounts in General Ledger, also under Setup, and we'll pull up account number 1, and it keeps track of what the last check number was, and when you're first setting it up, you put in what the last check number was. And this is where you tell it what account over into GL to post to. So when we write a check against bank account number 1, it's going to pull that money out of, in this instance, the operating account. If you have 3 bank accounts that you write checks out of, one being an operating account, one being a client advance account, and perhaps another being a trust account, which isn't even in this side of the software. There's a whole separate package for trust accounting. Then you could set up bank account number 1 to be your operating account, and you'd link it here into your operating account. And you could set up bank account number 2 to be your client cost advanced account. Some firms like to have a separate checking account to do cost advances. And here you would link it into that other account. We don't have one here, but we would see it. Where are these coming from? They're coming from General Ledger. Over in General Ledger in your chart of accounts, you have all your bank accounts, and here they are. 3 bank accounts in my example. And if we look at these are the details on those bank accounts. So it's a little confusing because you have a bank account in GL and you have a bank account in Accounts Payable. They're really the same bank account, but you hook them together so that when you write a check in Accounts Payable against that bank account, it knows to post it against this bank account over here in General Ledger. So to summarize, you set up your integration right here under customization by going into the tabs in General Ledger, tabs, specifically General Ledger. You set up your bank accounts and you tell it which cash account, which bank account over in GL to integrate against. And once you've done that, when you go to do an invoice, all you have to do is say which bank account right here, and it defaults, and it's automatically going to do this on second and subsequent, but that first time you have to tell it what you're posting it against. Are there any more questions on that, Leanne?
There are no more questions, Paul.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that does it for today then. I guess I got through that without really even sweating. So I'm very, very proud of myself. Very quickly, I want to mention that next month at the Tabs3 Virtual User Group meeting, we are talking about trust integration. Again, how does trust integrate and how do you set it up to integrate with Tabs? And also how do you create a new bank account in Accounts Payable? Now, we covered a lot of that just now. Mary Jo will be here next month, so she'll probably give you a little more insight in how to set up that account, probably both in the GL and AP side. Do remember that on our website, we have, if you go here and then scroll down, you'll see the Tabs3 Virtual User Group meeting, the PracticeMaster, the World Docs. We have our webinars. We have our eBites series where Mary Jo gives little 3-4 minute snippets of information, lots of those in there. And we have the Paul and Mary Jo show, which is more of a TV show type format where we'll take 10 or 15 or 20 minutes and delve very deeply into a topic that is a little broader than one that we would cover in an eBite. And this is where you register for these live events, the VUGs, the Virtual User Group meetings, and the Coffee Pot webinars. But it's also where you go to look for prior recordings. So if you ever need to see something that you saw in a prior Tabs3 or PracticeMaster Virtual User Group meeting, this is where to come to get it. And you'll find the descriptions and the titles as they were before, and all you need to do is click on this or click on one of the television icons and you'll be able to watch that recorded version. So that does it. Everybody have a good rest of the afternoon. We will see you next month. Bye-bye.